The morning sun stretched long shadows across Camp Pendleton's outdoor shooting range, casting a golden glow on the freshly cleaned concrete and the neatly lined-up targets. It was qualification day for Alpha Company's newest Marines, a group of eager young men, fresh out of boot camp and brimming with confidence. Their chatter filled the crisp morning air as they checked their modern M4 carbines, adjusted optical sights, and boasted about the scores they were certain they'd achieve. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen, a seasoned veteran of 35, walked steadily along the line, inspecting weapons, offering last-minute tips, and listening patiently to the bragging of the recruits. He had seen it all, cocky new Marines overestimating their abilities, but he let them have their moment. Today, however, he knew would humble most of them soon enough. Then, from the far end of the range, an unusual figure emerged. An elderly man, probably in his late 70s, moved slowly yet deliberately toward an empty firing position. He wore faded jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and a baseball cap without insignia. What immediately caught the young Marine's attention, however, was not his age but the weapon he carried. In his weathered hands rested a rifle that looked like it belonged in a history book. Private Jake Morrison, a 19-year-old from Texas, whispered to his friend, "Holy crap, look at Grandpa over there." The old man seemed entirely unaware of the stares and whispers, methodically setting up a small leather case containing ammunition unlike anything the Marines had seen. The bullets had the dull patina of age, each casing hand-loaded with care. Staff Sergeant Chen approached the man, curiosity hidden beneath professional courtesy. "Excuse me, sir. May I check your range card and ID? And what kind of rifle is that?" The veteran looked up, eyes steady and clear. "M1 Garand, 3006 Springfield," he replied, handing over an ID. It was current, but issued decades ago. Retired Master Sergeant William Bill Hayes. Service dates 1965-1995. Vietnam? Chen asked, noting the veteran's age. Hayes nodded quietly. 2 tours, 5th Special Forces Group. The young Marines nearby started paying closer attention. Special Forces carried a reputation even among elite units. Still, the sight of the frail old man with his ancient rifle prompted more skepticism. "No offense, Sergeant Hayes, but are you sure that old gun is safe to fire?" Morrison asked nervously, half laughing. "It looks like it might explode in your hands." A few Marines chuckled. Hayes smiled unfazed. "She's been reliable for 60 years. I think she's got a few more rounds left." Another Marine pointed to the 300-yard line. "Can you even see the targets from here?" Hayes glanced up, calm and assured. "My eyes work fine, son." He began methodically loading the rifle. The distinctive ping of the Garand echoed across the range, a sound unfamiliar to the young Marines. As Staff Sergeant Chen called for the range to go hot, 20 Marines took their positions, rifles equipped with every modern advantage. Hayes, by contrast, assumed a textbook-prone position, simple and precise, his Garand looking almost primitive next to the polished M4s. While the Marines fumbled with their optics and bipods, Hayes remained perfectly still, exuding an air of quiet authority. The targets popped up, rapid fire erupted from the young Marines, the chatter of modern rifles filling the air. Then came Hayes's first shot, a deep, deliberate bang. Each shot that followed was measured, precise, and terrifyingly effective. The Marines noticed something unsettling. While they fired rapidly, their hits were scattered, but Hayes's shots were exact, each finding the center of mass. Private Morrison paused mid-firing, mesmerized. The old man was not merely hitting targets, he was destroying them. At 300, 400, and even 500 yards, Hayes's bullets formed tight clusters where any hit could be lethal. Silence fell over the range. For the first time that morning, the young Marines were not mocking. They were watching, learning without realizing it, as a living legend demonstrated that mastery and experience could outclass technology, youth, and bravado. The morning's initial commotion gradually settled into an unusual quiet as the qualification continued. While the young Marines fired rapidly, their rifles producing a continuous chatter of semi-automatic bursts, the elderly veteran remained calm, each shot deliberate and measured. The difference was immediately noticeable, though many of the recruits were too absorbed in their own scores to recognize it at first. Private Morrison, still shaken by the old man's presence, couldn't help but steal glances. Hayes, with the M1 Garand in his steady hands, exuded an aura of quiet mastery. Every motion was precise, aligning the iron sights, steadying his breathing, gently squeezing the trigger, and following through with perfect discipline. It was as though time itself had slowed around him. The distinct ping of the Garand's loading mechanism resonated through the range, a sound that seemed almost musical compared to the mechanical chatter of the modern rifles. Staff Sergeant Chen observed, silently from the side, binoculars trained on both the young Marines and Hayes. The contrast could not have been more striking. Advanced optics and cutting-edge weaponry in the hands of eager novices versus a decades-old rifle wielded by a man whose very presence demanded respect. Chen's eyes narrowed as Hayes fired the first series of shots. Each bullet hit exactly where it was intended, the metallic clang from the targets ringing clearly and unmistakably. "Look at that," Morrison muttered under his breath, unable to focus on his own target. The 300-yard silhouette, which he had struggled to keep within the sights, was now pockmarked with tiny, precise holes. The 400-yard target, normally a challenge for even seasoned marksmen, displayed the same remarkable grouping. And the 500-yard target, barely visible, bore multiple hits right in the vital zones. It was a level of accuracy that defied belief, made more astonishing by the fact that Hayes was using iron sights rather than modern optics. The young Marines slowed their fire, curiosity and disbelief overtaking their initial bravado. Every shot from the Garand was deliberate, almost ritualistic. Breathe, aim, squeeze, and follow through. Morrison's jaw tightened as he watched, realizing that his own flurry of rapid shots had produced far less effective results. The veterans' calm precision contrasted sharply with their chaotic attempts to impress each other. As the qualification time ended, Staff Sergeant Chen called for a ceasefire. The recruits lowered their rifles, chatting nervously, some confident, others puzzled. Chen, however, focused entirely on Hayes's targets, scanning the clusters of precise hits with disbelief. The range safety officer joined him, and together they examined the distant targets. Murmurs spread quickly among the Marines. Every target from 100 to 500 yards was perfectly centered. "Sergeant Hayes," the safety officer finally called out, voice filled with awe. "Can you explain how you just outshot 20 Marines using a rifle that's over 70 years old?" Hayes, methodically cleaning the rifle with practiced care, looked up and smiled gently. "Practice," he said simply. "Lots and lots of practice." The recruits leaned in, wanting more than that. Morrison asked quietly, "There's got to be more to it than just practice. What's your secret?" Hayes studied the faces of the young Marines for the first time, their awe palpable. "You want to know the real difference?" he said. "You were trying to hit targets. I was trying to stop threats." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The distinction seemed subtle, but it carried the weight of life and death, experience, and hard-earned skill. For the first time, the young Marines began to see Hayes not just as an old man with a relic, but as a warrior whose life had depended on each carefully placed shot. The Marines had finished their qualification attempts, but the atmosphere remained, thick with awe and disbelief. Hayes sat calmly at his firing position, methodically cleaning his M1 Garand, the metallic ping echoing faintly in the morning air. The young recruits, once full of bravado, now whispered among themselves, sharing glances of astonishment. None could deny what they had just witnessed. A man in his 70s, wielding a World War II-era rifle, had outshot 20 of them with weapons equipped with all the latest technology. Private Morrison, unable to contain his curiosity, approached Hayes cautiously. "Sir, how do you do it?" he asked, voice tinged with a mix of awe and frustration. Hayes looked up slowly, his eyes calm yet piercing. He leaned back on his elbows, the rifle resting gently beside him. "It's not about how you fire," he said. "It's about why you fire." The young Marine frowned, unsure what he meant. Hayes continued, his voice low but carrying weight. Every one of your shots today, you were thinking about scores, about qualifications, about impressing your buddies. Each round you pulled was about proving yourself. That's not wrong, but it's not everything. He gestured toward the targets in the distance. When I shoot, I remember faces. I remember the men who depend on me to come home alive. Every shot has meaning beyond the paper target. Morrison's eyes widened. He had seen training videos, read manuals, even attended lectures on marksmanship. But this was something entirely different. Hayes stood slowly, stretching slightly, his movements deliberate and controlled. In 1968, outside of Dang, he began, voice steady yet heavy with memory. My squad was pinned down by a sniper. We couldn't see him, couldn't locate his position. Every few minutes one of my men would try to move and he'd be at risk. He paused, eyes clouding briefly as he recalled the moment. I finally spotted muzzle flash from about 400 yards. One shot. That was all I had. Miss, and my brother dies. The range seemed to shrink around them. The other Marines leaned in, absorbing every word, feeling the weight of experience in every syllable. Morrison whispered, "Did you get him?" Hayes nodded solemnly. One shot. Enemy sniper neutralized. But that was just the beginning. Over 13 months, I took 47 lives at ranges from 100 to 600 yards. Every single shot was to save American lives. Every single one mattered more than anything else in my life. A heavy silence settled over the young Marines. It wasn't fear, they weren't in immediate danger, but a profound respect had taken root. This wasn't a man showing off. This was a warrior, forged in circumstances that demanded perfection, precision, and responsibility beyond imagination. Finally, Hayes straightened and smiled faintly, a hint of warmth breaking through the stern exterior. That's the difference, he said simply. You trained to pass a test. I trained to come home alive. You can have the best equipment, the most advanced optics, the fastest rifles, but none of it replaces fundamentals, patience, and respect for your weapon. Private Morrison swallowed hard, a new understanding forming in his mind. The veteran's presence, the careful ritual with the M1 Garand, the deliberate calm in the midst of chaos. It was a lesson that could not be taught in a manual or drilled in a simulator. It was something lived, felt, and carried in the mind and heart. As Hayes began packing his rifle back into its worn leather case, the young Marines felt an unspoken shift. Today wasn't just about qualification scores or target practice. Today, they had glimpsed the essence of true marksmanship and the mindset of a warrior. And for Morrison, the lesson was personal. A spark had been lit, a desire to learn not just to shoot, but to understand what mastery truly meant. The following Saturday, Camp Pendleton buzzed with an unusual excitement. Word had spread quickly about the elderly veteran who had outshot an entire platoon of Marines with a rifle that seemed more suited for a museum than the modern battlefield. Young recruits gathered around the range, some skeptical, some curious, but all eager to witness the man who had earned their newfound respect. Master Sergeant Hayes arrived precisely on schedule, carrying his faithful M1 Garand and a leather case filled with carefully hand-loaded ammunition. His movements were deliberate, a ritual honed over decades, as he approached the familiar firing position. The young Marines watched silently, some leaning on their rifles, others sitting on benches, all captivated by the presence of a living legend. Private Morrison, first among the Marines to approach Hayes that day, felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. "Sir, will you show us how to shoot like that?" he asked, his voice a mixture of reverence and hope. Hayes paused and looked around, finally smiling, a rare, warm expression that seemed to bridge the gap between generations. "Son," he said, "I've been waiting 60 years for someone to ask me that question." He knelt beside the firing line, beginning not with advanced techniques, but with the fundamentals. "Marksmanship isn't about speed or firepower," Hayes explained. "It's about patience, control, and respect for the weapon. The rifle is a tool. It doesn't think for you, and it won't forgive mistakes. Treat it properly, and it will serve you. Treat it carelessly, and it could end everything you care about. The young Marines listened intently, absorbing every word. Hayes demonstrated the basics: correct posture, proper grip, controlled breathing, and the ritual of aiming and follow-through. Each step was slow and precise, as though teaching a meditation rather than a martial skill. The metallic ping of the Garand echoed with a sense of reverence, each shot a quiet testament to decades of experience. Your rifle, Hayes continued, can be the difference between life and death. It saved my life and the lives of my brothers more times than I can count. And if you approach it the right way, it will do the same for you. He gestured toward the distant targets, now glimmering under the morning sun. Accuracy isn't just about hitting paper. It's about understanding what every shot means, about controlling your body, your mind, and your intent. As the session progressed, Morrison and the others began to see the truth in Hayes's words. Their hurried, competitive shooting felt clumsy compared to the calm precision he demanded. They learned to slow down, to breathe properly, to focus entirely on the fundamentals, and to respect the weapon they held. The lesson extended beyond marksmanship. It was a lesson in discipline, awareness, and the mindset of a warrior. By the end of the morning, a remarkable transformation had occurred. The Marines, once eager to rush through qualification for a score, now approached the line with patience and intent. They weren't just firing at paper targets, they were learning to think, to calculate, and to appreciate the weight of responsibility behind every shot. Hayes packed his rifle once again, satisfied that the seeds of mastery had been planted. Morrison and a few other Marines stayed behind, asking questions, seeking clarification, and absorbing every bit of knowledge the veteran shared. The respect in the range was palpable. The laughter and chatter from weeks before had vanished, replaced by a quiet determination to learn and improve. As Hayes walked toward the parking area, the young Marines watched him go, realizing that this was only the beginning. A lifetime of experience had been condensed into a morning lesson, and for those willing to listen and observe, the veteran's teachings would resonate far beyond the shooting range. Weeks passed, and Master Sergeant Hayes's Saturday morning sessions became a fixture at Camp Pendleton. What had started as a small circle of curious Marines quickly expanded. Word spread through the base like wildfire. Here was a veteran who had outshot an entire platoon with a World War II rifle, and now he was willing to teach. By the fifth session, 20 Marines were lined up along the firing range, each one eager to absorb every nuance of his instruction. Hayes approached the line with the same deliberate ritual he had followed for decades. Every movement was calm, controlled, and precise. He laid out his M1 Garand and hand-loaded rounds, the metallic ping echoing across the range, drawing the attention of every Marine present. His eyes scanned the line, assessing each recruit, understanding their strengths and weaknesses without a word. Discipline is everything, Hayes began, his voice steady and firm. Control your body first, then your mind. A steady hand and clear thought lead to a steady shot. He demonstrated the proper stance and grip, showing how the body should align naturally, how the rifle should rest against the shoulder, and how breathing could stabilize aim. Each motion was purposeful, almost meditative. Private Morrison, now deeply committed to learning, followed Hayes's movements meticulously, mimicking every adjustment. He could feel the difference immediately. A slight change in grip reduced the tremor in his hands. Controlled exhalation steadied the iron sights. Hayes observed him closely, nodding once in approval before moving to another Marine. Precision isn't about speed, Hayes continued. It's about respect. Respect for your weapon, for the targets, for the lives that depend on your skill. Every round must be intentional. He gestured to the targets at 100, 300, and 500 yards. Think about where this bullet will go. Think about why it's going there. The rest will follow naturally. The young Marines began to internalize his words. Gone was the frantic competitive energy that had characterized their initial sessions. Instead, each shot was deliberate, measured, and executed with patience. The sound of rapid-fire chatter was replaced by the rhythm of the Garand, punctuated by the ping of precision hits on distant steel targets. Hayes walked along the line, correcting minor mistakes with quiet authority. "Relax your shoulders," he instructed one Marine. "Focus your eyes here, not on the clock," he told another. He emphasized fundamentals: proper sight alignment, trigger control, follow-through, and the mental focus necessary to execute a perfect shot under pressure. By the end of the session, the transformation was evident. The young Marines, once impatient and distracted, had developed a sense of control and respect for their rifles that transcended mere technique. They were no longer just firing at targets. They were learning the mindset of a warrior, understanding that every shot had meaning. Hayes packed his rifle, satisfied with the day's progress. Morrison approached him, eyes bright with newfound understanding. "Sir, I think I finally get it," he said softly. "It's not just about hitting the target. It's about how you approach it every time." Hayes smiled faintly, a glint of pride in his eyes. "Exactly, son. That understanding is the beginning of mastery. Remember, it's not the rifle that makes the marksman. It's the marksman who makes the rifle." As the Marines filed off the range, the lessons of discipline, patience, and respect had sunk in. For Morrison and his peers, Hayes's guidance was no longer an extraordinary display of skill. It was a blueprint for life, a lesson in responsibility, and a living example of how experience, focus, and dedication could transform an ordinary individual into an extraordinary marksman. Months had passed since Hayes first arrived at Camp Pendleton, and the veteran's presence had become a fixture of the base's shooting culture. Saturdays were no longer ordinary training days. They had evolved into immersive sessions where young Marines were given a glimpse into the mind of a master marksman. Hayes's M1 Garand had become more than a rifle. It was a symbol, a lesson, and a bridge connecting generations of warriors. Private Morrison, now a regular attendee, noticed subtle changes in himself and his peers. The impatience that once characterized their training was replaced by focus and intentionality. Marines approached their rifles with reverence, aware that mastery was not achieved overnight, but cultivated through patience, discipline, and repeated practice. Hayes had shown them that even the oldest tools, when wielded correctly, could surpass modern technology in the hands of a dedicated expert. On this particular Saturday, Hayes stood at the firing line, the sun glinting off his worn leather ammunition case. He addressed the group with calm authority. "Today, we go beyond targets. We explore mindset. Accuracy is essential, but understanding why each shot matters is what transforms skill into mastery." His voice, steady and unhurried, carried across the range, commanding attention without demanding it. He demonstrated a series of drills, emphasizing controlled breathing, measured follow-through, and conscious observation. Every shot was deliberate, every movement intentional. The Marines practiced in silence, absorbing not just the techniques but the philosophy behind them. Hayes walked among them, correcting minor errors, offering quiet guidance, and reinforcing lessons of respect for both the rifle and the responsibility that came with it. Morrison felt a profound shift within himself. He had once thought marksmanship was a measure of speed, reflex, and equipment. Now he understood it was a reflection of character, focus, and the mental discipline to act precisely when it counted. Watching Hayes handle his Garand, every motion deliberate, he realized the rifle itself was almost an extension of Hayes's mind and will. At one point, Hayes paused and looked around at the recruits, his eyes settling on each one briefly. "You see," he said, "the rifle is just metal and wood. It doesn't care who holds it. The skill, patience, and respect you bring to it determine the outcome. Remember that every round you fire could make a difference. Sometimes to life, sometimes to death. Never forget why you train." The session concluded with each Marine taking one final series of shots. The difference was striking. Their shots were steadier, grouped more tightly, and delivered with confidence and purpose. Even the most skeptical Marines who had doubted Hayes at first now recognized the profound impact of his teaching. As Hayes packed his rifle into its leather case, Morrison approached, eyes bright with gratitude. "Sir, I think I finally understand what you mean about mastery. Hayes smiled faintly, a hint of pride in his weathered face. Son, understanding is just the beginning. Mastery is a lifelong pursuit. Keep practicing, keep learning, and never forget the responsibility that comes with every trigger pull. The young Marines departed the range that day with more than improved marksmanship. They carried a sense of purpose, a new respect for their tools, and the awareness that their training could one day save lives. Hayes had passed on something far more valuable than technical skill. He had passed on the mindset of a warrior, the discipline of precision, and the patience of mastery. By now, the presence of Master Sergeant William Hayes at Camp Pendleton had become legendary. Marines spoke in hushed tones about the elderly, veteran with silvered hair and a weathered, lined face who could outshoot men half his age. His calm, deliberate movements and the patient gleam in his pale blue eyes commanded respect. The M1 Garand, scarred and aged, rested against his sturdy yet slightly stooped frame, a testament to decades of use and unwavering care. On this Saturday morning, the range buzzed with an energy different from previous sessions. Hayes arrived wearing faded gray jeans, a plain dark green t-shirt, and his signature baseball cap, the brim slightly frayed. His weathered hands carefully carried the rifle and a worn leather ammunition case. The younger Marines, dressed in crisp digital camo and combat boots, immediately fell silent, recognizing the quiet authority he brought simply by being present. Hayes sat up at the firing line, inspecting the rifle one last time. The metallic ping of the hand-loaded rounds echoed faintly as he loaded the first cartridge. "Focus," he said, his voice calm, resonant, and measured. "Every movement, every breath, every trigger pull counts. Remember, you're not here to compete. You're here to learn, to survive, and to respect the weapon in your hands." Private Morrison, standing closest to Hayes, observed the veteran's posture. The way Hayes held the rifle, forearm steady, shoulder firm, head slightly tilted, made him look almost statuesque despite his age. His piercing blue eyes scanned the targets with the precision of a lifetime of experience, and every deliberate motion radiated authority. Morrison mirrored the stance, adjusting his own grip, trying to internalize the same calm energy. The training session focused not just on marksmanship, but on situational awareness, patience, and deliberate action. Marines practiced slow, intentional shooting, often pausing to assess wind, distance, and body alignment. Hayes walked along the line, occasionally resting a hand on a Marine's shoulder, correcting their stance, or adjusting sight alignment. His hands were large, veined, and worn from decades of military service, yet gentle in their corrections. As the session drew to a close, Hayes gathered the group. "What you've learned isn't just how to hit targets," he explained, eyes locking briefly with each Marine. "It's how to think like someone who understands the consequences of every action. A weapon in capable hands is a tool. In careless hands, it's a danger. Remember that, and respect it." Morrison and several Marines approached Hayes after the session, eager to ask questions, to better understand his philosophy and technique. Hayes smiled faintly, the lines around his eyes deepening. "I've taught hundreds of Marines, but the real lesson is not in my skill. It's in your dedication to learning. Carry this forward, and someday you'll teach the next generation the way I've taught you." By the time Hayes left the range, the young Marines carried more than knowledge. They carried the mindset of responsibility, focus, and respect for their weapons. Hayes had passed on a legacy that would endure long after his Saturday mornings were over. That true mastery was a blend of discipline, patience, and unwavering commitment. The months of dedication had transformed Camp Pendleton's Saturday mornings into a living classroom of discipline, focus, and respect. Marines who had once rushed through their drills now approached each session with measured patience, mirroring the deliberate precision of Master Sergeant William Hayes. On this particular morning, the veteran arrived as always, silver hair peeking out from his frayed baseball cap, lined face revealing decades of experience, and pale blue eyes scanning the range with the calm authority of a man who had seen life and death depend on every shot. He wore faded gray jeans and a dark green t-shirt, and his weathered hands carried the familiar M1 Garand and worn leather ammunition case. The younger Marines, dressed in digital camo, stiffened slightly at the sight of him, a mixture of reverence and anticipation filling the crisp morning air. Hayes laid out his rifle and ammunition with meticulous care, inspecting every detail. "Today," he began, his voice steady and resonant, "we honor the craft of marksmanship, not for scores, not for medals, but for understanding, respect, and mastery." Each word seemed to hang in the sunlight, commanding attention without demanding it. The session focused on advanced drills, teaching Marines to integrate mental discipline with technical skill. Hayes demonstrated each move with careful deliberation. The positioning of the feet, the alignment of the shoulders, the exact placement of the hands. Each Marine mirrored him, feeling the shift from mechanical repetition to mindful execution. Private Morrison, now a dedicated protege, studied every nuance, adjusting his stance and breathing with the same measured rhythm that Hayes had instilled over months of training. What set this session apart was not the mechanical perfection of the shots, but the mindset Hayes imparted. "A weapon is only as good as the mind behind it," he explained, pausing to let the words sink in. "Every shot is a responsibility. Every round fired has purpose. Mastery comes when action aligns with understanding." Marines nodded, the weight of his experience settling over them like a tangible force. After hours of patient instruction, Hayes gathered the Marines at the line. He spoke quietly but with conviction. "You have learned not just to shoot, but to think, to respect, and to control. These lessons will serve you in ways no score can measure. Carry them forward. Teach others. Remember that mastery is a lifelong journey." As the session ended, Morrison approached him, eyes wide with respect. "Sir, I feel like I've learned more than I ever imagined. Thank you for showing us what it means to truly master a weapon." Hayes smiled faintly, the lines on his face deepening with satisfaction. "Son, the knowledge is yours now. Use it well, teach it, and pass it on. That is the legacy of mastery." Even as Hayes packed his M1 Garand into its leather case and adjusted his frayed baseball cap, the impact of his teachings lingered. Marines left the range transformed, focused, disciplined, and aware of the responsibility that accompanied every firearm. Hayes had passed on more than technical skill. He had instilled a mindset, a respect for life and duty, and a standard of excellence that would endure long after he had gone. Years from now, Marines would tell stories of the elderly Master Sergeant, who arrived at Camp Pendleton with a World War II rifle, outshooting entire platoons, and more importantly, passing on the wisdom and discipline that turned ordinary soldiers into masters of their craft. The M1 Garand, once mocked as antiquated, had become a symbol of experience, patience, and the enduring power of knowledge applied with skill and respect.